Today, Francois has a question that I bet many of you have asked yourself at one point in your photographic learning process. Why do we have to edit our photos? This episode is brought to you by discoverthetopfloor.com. Take a great journey to an amazing place with like-minded people who share your passion for photography and who are eager to learn a few new twists and get great places in front of the lenses. Check out discoverthetopfloor.com. This is Tips from the Top Floor, episode 792 for Thursday, September the 26th, 2017.
Tips from the top floor, tips from the top, all right, from the top floor.
Hey, hello, welcome. This is Chris Marquardt, and welcome to Tips from the Top Floor, the longest running photography show on the planet, coming to you from the Viewfinder Villa outside the gates of Hanover. Let me see. This week we have, well, before I go into a question on editing photos, just a quick thank you to the Slack community. There's this Lightroom video workshop in the making right now, and the producer, you know, the way this is being produced is that I'm in front of the camera, I talk, I explain, and then there will be mistakes, and then we'll have to kind of make a cut and start over at a specific point. And there's these little tiny edit points in a production like that. And to find those over a, I don't know, 5 to 6 hour video, that's quite a lot of work. And I enlisted members of the Slack, and I love the Slack community. So those of you who helped, thank you so much. You had a bit of an early preview of the unfinished work in progress video workshop, and you found a lot of great areas that could need a little bit of polishing. And I promise to send you guys a little thank you. Been a bit busy, but it's not forgotten. You will get something the next couple of weeks. So without further ado, let's get into the show. Here's a question by Francois.
Hello, Chris. Thank you for the show. I'm just working on some edits in Lightroom of some photos taken of a family event where I had to take pictures with kind of too much sunlight and too much sunlight in the background. I could not really choose where I was standing. Result is now I have to kind of edit most of the photos, and actually that works out quite well. Question is, why do I have to edit most of these photos to try to tune the highlights, shadows, whites, black in Lightroom, essentially to try to get the sky right and the clouds right and the overall color of the picture right? Is it because I didn't take the picture correctly in the first place? Or is that rather because of some other reason? Because it is just the fact that pictures cannot be taken straight from from day one or immediately from the camera, and that some editing in certain circumstances is always needed. Thank you for your input. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Francois. So the question is, do you have to edit that? Why do you have to? Is it important? Why can't the camera just take the picture the right way from the start? Now let's look at this from a few angles, because first of all, and this is more of a technical angle that I want to start with. First of all, compared to your eyes, the camera has technical limitations. Where your eyes might see detail in all parts of the image, like if it has a high dynamic range, the very bright ones and the very deep shadows, your eyes might be able to see, or should be able to see, details in those almost simultaneously. And where that's the case, the camera might not be able to do this. So the camera will have to make a decision in order to fit that image within its technical limitations. It's just a necessity. The key point here is that it will make decisions for you. If you leave the camera at its default settings, it will make these decisions for you. Now, the second angle to approach this from is, even if your camera could fit your idea of what the photo should look like within its technical limitations, the camera doesn't really know what your intention for the photo was. It's not a mind reader, and you might have a very different idea of how that photo should look than your camera will make it. Let's look just a simple example. That's the same example that I use every time. A backlit portrait. Put a person in a doorway. It's very bright outside. You're shooting from the inside outwards. So the outside is lit by the sunshine. The inside isn't really lit that well. So now your camera has the choice. If you let it do its thing, it will have to choose between making that face of the person visible in the photo, which means raising the exposure. So you would get a well-exposed face, but everything that's behind that person on the outside will be overexposed. You will have a very a real portrait, but with an overexposed surrounding, which I do all the time. It's something that it's actually a look that I kind of like. Or your intention could be that you want that person as a silhouette. You want that person just as the black silhouette in front of a well-exposed outside. How can the camera know which of those two choices is yours? It can't. So the camera will have to make a decision. And in a light situation like that, it will definitely have to make a decision because you have a very high dynamic difference, a very high brightness difference between that face of that person and the outside. But back to the question, do you have to edit your photos? Well, again, the answer is still yes and no. Let's make another little detour into film. Yeah, sorry, film. I have to talk about film because that really makes sense here. And there I want to go down two different routes. First, let's look at film photography. If you're old enough, you will know that. If not, you might learn something. Film from an amateur point of view. I used to be a photo amateur. I used to just take photos for fun, and I used to shoot film. And then, did I edit those photos? No, of course not. The film gave me a framework in terms of how do the colors come out. If I chose a Kodak film versus a Fuji film, I knew if I chose Fuji, it would have these Fuji colors, very, very saturated greens of grass, for example, and those deep skies and things. So choosing the film gives me a framework. If I chose a black and white film, I knew that the next 36 pictures would be black and white. Different films have different ways they deal with contrast. So you're making a decision, and that film will then give you a basic framework. And then, as an amateur, you give that to a lab for a development. The lab will do the development for you. And then they will enlarge. They will take decisions for you. They will put this picture on paper for you. That's called enlargement. They take that negative and put it on paper. And during that process, the lab will make more decisions for you. It will look at are the colors nicely saturated, are the contrasts okay, and then you get those pictures back. That's how film was done in an amateur context. In a professional context, film included editing. Absolutely. You had to have some control over that process. Still, the film as a professional film would give you a framework, so you would choose the film based on which direction you wanted to take the result in. If you were shooting landscape, there's a good chance you were using Fuji Velvia because it deals differently with these landscapes than other film, or Kodachrome, or Ektachrome, or I don't know. There's so many. There were so many color films. There's still quite a few out there, but that choice would then be done by the professional in order to kind of preempt that result a little bit. And then the professional would develop their own film. And during development, you have some influence on how that development turns out. And then the professional would enlarge the photos. And there are steps during that enlargement that a professional photographer would take, like burning, dodging, changing color filters, changing contrasts, and so on by the choice of paper. There are many different things that a photographer would do, and many of these things you will still find in Photoshop. They're still there, burning, dodging, still the same terms, but that's what a professional would do. In the end, your decision was within what framework of a film choice you would do. But then in the end, you would, no matter if you're professional or an amateur, you would have to take more choices for your photography that are removed from the material side. You would have to choose the choice of which light do I shoot in? Is that the right time of day to shoot in? Is that the right light situation for the kind of story I want to tell? How do I compose that picture? No piece of film, no piece of digital gear will take that decision from you. How will I compose the picture? What do I include in the frame? What do I leave out? And so on and so on. So there are a lot of decisions that you will still have to do, and you always still had to do. And that's the same today. If we transform or if we transfer that film thing to the digital world, it would probably be closest to the distinction between JPEG and RAW. As an amateur, with film, you had the lab take all the decisions for you. You might take a few decisions in the beginning, but the lab was doing the rest for you. If you shoot JPEG today, that's pretty much the same thing. The camera, or rather the picture style that you select in the camera, that will give you a framework. That will give you, it's pretty much the picture style is like the film you choose. And then the camera will make decisions for you, will make that development in air quotes. It will mess with the colors, and it will optimize the contrasts, and it will make decisions for you. If you shoot RAW, you will bypass all the interfering by the camera. You make the decisions. You will develop that film. Develop, again in air quotes, which is you take it into Lightroom or any other software that does RAW development, and you will make decisions on the contrast, on the colors, on all the things that a professional photographer would have done in the lab. Now, in the end, it's a matter of convenience, of what you want or of your needs. Hold that thought, hold that thought. We're not done with Francois' question about editing your photos just yet, but first, I would like to say a quick thanks to this week's sponsor, Audible. Audible content includes an unmatched selection of audiobooks, original audio shows, news, comedy, and more from the leading publishers, broadcasters, entertainers, and business information providers. Unlike a streaming or rental service, with Audible you own your books, so you can access them anytime, anywhere from almost any device, including your iPhone, iPad, Android, Amazon Fire tablets, or Windows Phone. Plus, thanks to the Great Listen Guarantee, if you don't like your title, you can swap it for a new one. Not to mention, Audible Channels gives you a collection of exclusive originals, short stories, and comedy, so you always have something new to listen to. I'm not sure if you knew it, but I'm personally a bit of a sci-fi nerd. Not really the big franchises, but books by specific authors. I mean, I love me some Heinlein, or a more recent author that I discovered a few years ago, John Scalzi. If you've ever watched any Star Trek at all, I highly recommend his great story, Red Shirts. The audiobook is read by the great Will Wheaton, and the whole story is just a fun ride. Actually, I think I've listened to that one at least 3 times over the last 2 years. Red Shirts by John Scalzi. And the best thing, you can get this and any other audiobook for free with a 30-day trial at audible.com/topfloor. That's www.audible.com/topfloor for a free audiobook with your 30-day trial. All right, here's Francois' question again about if it's necessary to edit photo. And then here's one more angle to look at this from. Cameras won't know your intention. We already talked about this. They can only guess. The camera will guess the color by doing some automated white balance. It will guess the exposure and it will do the brightness of the photo by juggling some settings. And I've seen a similar learning process with many photographers, myself included. In the beginning, I was relying on the camera to do the right thing. And sometimes that would yield a really good photo. And that happened when every time the stars aligned. I didn't have much influence on when I took a good photo. I just knew I did it when I saw it. When I did a good job with composition, when the light was good, when the camera made the right decisions with exposure and the colors and everything else, when everything came together, it would result in a great photo. But I didn't have enough control, so I started to nudge some of the camera's decisions. I switched, for example, to aperture priority mode. A lot of photographers do this in the beginning. And this way you can override the camera's decision on depth of field by choosing your own aperture. The next step was to override the camera's decisions on white balance, setting that manually because it would just frequently get the colors wrong. The camera would just not do a good job at the colors. And at one point, I switched to RAW to get even more flexibility with my photos and to get more freedom to edit them afterwards, because RAW will do that for you. It will allow you to edit them more than if you shot a JPEG. If you shoot a JPEG, it's pretty much a finished product. And that's when my photography turned quite technical for a while and my creativity suffered again. It's really interesting because then you all of a sudden concentrate on getting that most perfect shot technically, because that's something that's easy to grasp for some people. But then, yeah, the creative side just didn't keep up with it. Which is why at one point that's one of the reasons I rediscovered film, because I wouldn't have to make any of the decisions up front by choosing the type of film before shooting and then letting the rest kind of fall into place. Anyway, that's a long story. Not going to go into this, but you get the gist of this, right? You don't have to edit your photos. You can use JPEG. You can let the camera make some of the decisions, choose a picture style, and in most cases be happy with it. But then today, if you want to have more control in the digital world, even as an amateur, you have the ability to do that. You can learn, you can nudge little things. You have the tools and ways to make that photo the way you intend it to be, or at least closer to it. And it's a process. It takes time to learn. But if that's what you want to do, you can do it. Your cameras, any camera nowadays can do that. But you can all have it in nuances in between as well. If that's all too much for you, hey, leave the camera on JPEG, select a picture style that fits the photo you want, and just learn a few ways to nudge that camera in the right direction. Maybe use exposure compensation to kind of tell the camera where to go, or you choose the white balance instead of letting the camera make that choice. It's a journey, and never have photographers had as much choice as today in how far along that journey they wanted to go. All right, that was it for this episode of Tips on Top Floor. Thanks again, everyone who participates in the Slack challenge. You can still get your photo in, and win the chance for a review here on the show. Yes, I do this every other month when a challenge is over. To get onto the Slack, you go to tfttf.com/yslack, WHYSLACK, and just go to the According Challenge channel. And thanks again to all the amazing Patreon supporters. Your volunteer support starts at just $1 per episode, and you will get early access to the episodes while helping keep the lights on here on the top floor. Find out more at tfttf.com/Patreon, and I really thank you for the support. Music for the show by Jeff Smith, silent partner Hans-Peter Kagerud, publishing by Release Pixie, Matt Refseder, Armstead, Slack invitations by CIO Russ. And if you want to join the discussion, go to tfttf.com/yslack, WHYSLACK. My name is Chris Marquardt. Follow me on Facebook and on Twitter at Chris Marquardt, Chris MARQUARDT. And of course, as usual, go out and take amazing photos. Don't forget to be nice to each other. And happy shooting.